it a try to this IOTA thing. But if you do, by all means, drop me a line. And if you need any, I don't know, help or any suggestions, any more resources, I'll be more than happy to share them right away with you guys. So thank you very much, Sam, for having me. And
You're here.
thank you very much. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. We give you a standing ovation if we were meeting in person, but we're on Zoom, so we'll just wave. We enjoyed that, and we thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. I realize that not being in person, you don't get the same feel, and that's mutual. But you know, I hope that we'll see some of you guys on the air.
Thank you so much. I notice you're not in my logbook, but I'm going to look for you down the road. Okay, we enjoyed that very much. Great presentation. I wanted to remind everybody that Wednesday night we have our technical and talk meeting. Everybody's welcome. And then, of course, a week from tonight will be our board meeting. We'll still be meeting on Zoom for our board meeting. So with that, does anybody have anything else tonight?
I'm good. Everybody's good.
Okay. Well, and we're going to hang around tonight and talk. If you want to hang around, you're just welcome to hang around and talk tonight for a while. But other than that, to close the meeting.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Here's a second.
I second.
Okay. Meeting's adjourned. And like I say, everybody can hang around and talk if you like.
Okay. Thank you. Very good presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Good night.
Thanks,
Good night.
Cezar. Great. Good deal.
Thank you again, Cezar. 161 to you. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Wayne. 161 to you back.
Thank you,
Cezar,
Cezar.
Thank you, Cezar. Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cezar.
Thanks a
Great.
lot, guys. Thank
Great
you.
program.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me join your meeting, gentlemen.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you, Neil. Cezar, I didn't know that you had talked with Wayne. Wayne is my almost next door neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. H4HG. He lives down the street from me about 3 miles. I use dipoles and 100 watts, and he uses antennas. And I can no longer farm because his antennas are always shading my tomato crop.
Yeah, well, my as chaser, I have a you know, for HF, I have a step IR BB18, which is operates as a 2-element beam on 40 and 3 on 30 and so on and so forth. But and I do have a little bit of power for sure. I have an amplifier for sure. So the idea was that my idea of initially going to expeditioning was that, well, you know, I don't have to have a big signal. The guys will dig me out and they'll, you know, but that was probably when the solar cycle was a little more generous than it is right now. So it's not necessarily that easy to obviously, I mean, you know very well this, you know, it's not that easy to, you have to put a decent signal, or otherwise some guys will get frustrated and, you know, but I still think that it's, the extra is the little mousy thing that, you know, cats will have to fight to get, and whether the signal is a little bit stronger or not as strong, they still have to fight for it. And you know, I do read a lot about propagation conditions, and I do have always, I prepare very detailed, let's say, time schedules with propagation windows. Now, that has to be checked against the actual propagation. But if you do that day one, you can easily, adjust it accordingly. We usually also have one of these tracking devices that allow people to send us, I copy you here, I copy you there, so I think it's just as important, because if you get 2, 3, 4 hours of good propagation with whatever, let's say, East Coast of North America, that should be plenty. And if you do get that every day, that should be plenty. Sure, a good beam will on the expedition will extend that period by another probably at least an hour. Not to mention that you may want different bands and this and that, but there are many expeditioners, not just myself. There are many guys who just go by themselves, and it's very difficult if you only stay 3 days to give so many people QSOs on each band. You try to focus on different bands, and I have to tell you honestly, sometimes, let's say when propagation is open, particularly with Europe, Northern Europe, Russia, you switch the band and you hear the same stations, and sometimes those who know me will realize that I'm slowing down, and instead of picking the guys, 3, 4 QSOs a minute or 5 QSOs a minute, I might pick 2 or 3 because I'm trying to get unique call signs. Otherwise, I'm just gonna pick the same guys, and the first 2 stations will be the same on each band. And before so that's okay for a DXCC being on the air for a week or 10 days. But for IOTA being on the air maybe for one single operator, from an IOTA that it's on the air every 20 years, I don't think it's possible. I think it would be, but again, it's up to the operator. If the operator doesn't think that it's good, then you can choose something else. I decided that way, but
Cool.
Cesar, just another question. I noticed you operated from a lighthouse, and it struck me as, well, first, DXCC and Islands on the Air are not in competition. They're very complementary, and they both do different things. But it struck me that this could also be in cooperation with Lighthouses on the Air, another program I don't know a lot about, but I've heard about it over the years.
I think you're absolutely right. 100%. There's no competition whatsoever with the DXCC, and certainly not with any other program, whether national or international or whatever. The only issue, though, with which I have to, I'm going to agree with a grain of salt, is funding. I remember that when I organized an operation. It was a team of 4. We operated as Zulu Lima 9 Alpha. Zulu Lima 9 Alpha operated from Antipodes, which was at the time a new IOTA. But was the first time that the DXCC realized that there was not part of any entity. And their reason for that was that, well, they never thought that somebody's going to operate from there. Just as simple as that. So, now that it is, well, let's see which one it is. And they agreed to change the name of, if you remember, the old thing, which was, what was that? Campbell and Auckland and Campbell, to Southern Antarctic Islands of New Zealand or something like that. Well, the funding that we had for this expedition, the cost of this expedition for us was, for the entire team, was $52,000 US. And we managed to raise, by the end of it, after everything, all the donations, everything that we received, $32,000. which we ended up each one of us covering approximately $5,000. Some a little bit more than others, but very minimal differences. And we were ecstatic because we thought that it might be much more than that. But what happened is that Zulu Lima 9 was an interesting DXCC. And although we did not operate on 160, we did not operate on 80, there were no conditions for 10. I don't think there were any conditions for 12, although we might have made some no, we did make some contacts on 12. I remember some UA zeros and JAs, maybe even Ws. We did get quite a bit of funding from the American clubs. So, and we also get a little bit of funding from Europe, some of the European clubs. So the moment that I think that most of the clubs have a certain ranking of their members and like a roster. And the guys take great pride in where they are on this roster. And when the big expeditions come, whatever theirs are, and they need, more members need them and so on and so forth, the decision is made to fund. It may not be a huge funding for the respective expedition, but $100, $50, $150, $200, it adds up, and by small amounts, it creates an impact. So I think that the competition is not with the program itself, but the activators do compete for the same resources. In other words, every year there would be, I don't know, I'm just going to say maybe 100 operations, of which 10 big or 20 very important DXCCs, and maybe another 20 or, IOTA, not on the same footing, but, it'll be important operations. And then another 50, 60, which may not have the same credentials. So, but there would be overall maybe 100 operations that people would support to some extent. Well, just imagine for a second that now you have 200 operations, because on 1 year, some IOTA guys decide to make, well, they're not going to have the same funding because the funding will be approximately the same, and now it's going to be somehow diluted. So it's probably a symbiotic relationship between chasers and activators, and I think that in the end we do fight a little bit from the same resources. So as far as the IOTA program, there's no competition with the DXCCs, but some of the activators who apply for sponsorship to maybe don't take this particular example, but let's say German DX Foundation or Clipperton DX or whatever, Southeastern Ohio Association or whatever, they will enter the same, they will be put on the grid, and they will be ranked, and they will receive or not funding as to the interests of their members. And that's all fine. It's a natural process. And my only hope is that eventually, if more of the North American clubs will decide little by little to embark on supporting, on issuing for their members additional rosters, some do, but most of them don't, then maybe there's going to be an impetus to consider not sponsoring all the IOTA programs, all the IOTA projects. That will be impossible. But maybe pick up a couple a year, 1, 3, and go for that. So that's my comment in response to that.
Yeah, well, thank you. I understand there is competition for resources, but it seems to me in that particular instance, you had multiple people who would be interested in seeing that on the air, seeing it like a lighthouse. And I know you covered this, but it was very quick. What qualifies as island? It had to be salt water, and was there a distance?
That is correct. That is correct. So there's a number of elements which are defined as part of the rules. But in short, it would have to be an open sea island, so close like Caspian Sea wouldn't count. Great Lakes, island on Great Lakes, or rivers, or small lakes, or Great Lakes, or big lakes, they won't count. So it's an open sea island. Number one. Number two would have to have a minimum 200 meter of water channel.
Oh, okay. 200 meters. I read that as 200 miles.
What that means is that if there's another island which does not qualify, that has, let's say, is the first to the mainland, and it has 20 meters of water, but the island has a kilometer, and it's separated by the next island by 40 meters of water, that second island wouldn't count, because it has 20 meters of water from the first one, and from the first one to the mainland, and another 40 meters of water between the first one and between itself and so it's a total of 60 meters of water, despite the fact that the island itself could have a mile, so it would be more than a mile away from the mainland.
Okay, that answered my question. And I'm sure someone has looked into this, but North Carolina along the coast has the Outer Banks, and there's so many islands out there that it seems like it would be maybe easy for some of us to slip away and do a mini expedition from a place like that.
And
would not be that hard.
Particularly Europe would love that, but the islands are, well, maybe in some cases we wouldn't necessarily list them all for a number of reasons, such as not knowing the maps, very tiny little things. Let's not list. There are over 16,000, probably about 16,500 islands listed in the directory. So all the islands which are part of the North American groups have been very, very scrutinized. It doesn't necessarily mean there wouldn't be new candidates, possibly, but it will have to be, we'll have to look for them to, we check them out. Now, the third rule is that it has to not be in a so-called enclosed bay. So what that means is that, or an estuary. So what that means is that if the two edges of the mainland are at any point closer than 5 kilometers, then any island past that would not count. So let's suppose that you have an estuary. That's just as simple as that, right? Some river somewhere, and the margins of the estuary are such that the distance is 4.5 kilometers at the edge. Then anything going upstream would be banned. But if at some point it's over 5, let's say the estuary is like St. Lawrence, for instance. There are lots of islands in the St. Lawrence which count for IOTA. But once you go deep into St. Lawrence River, they don't count anymore because they infringe upon the enclosed bay requirement. Just as simple as that. Now, as you may or may not know, St. Lawrence River, when at high tide, the ocean waters go, there's a current due to the ocean waters, due to the tide, that goes approximately 800 kilometers inland. But most of that, it's out of reach. They're not part of the IOTA. So it only be, the islands that are far outside, far closer to the mouth of St. Lawrence. Then there's another issue. Now we're going to the very nitty-gritty of this stuff. If the island, in order to build something on the island had to be scooped out below the water level, then the island can no longer count it has to be a natural occurring water. So, for example, off the coast of France, there are a number of islands which have had castles and there are fortresses, there are 45, and so on and so forth. If the fortifications are built on top of the island, or they leave sufficient raw island material above the waterline at high tide, then that island counts. But if that operation that operation led to pretty much the removal of the island, so that you can put a foundation and the island was excavated, and now it looks like a fortress, but it's all man-made, that doesn't count. So we have, these are very specifically mapped, and the islands are listed. As I said, we have in all these 1,011 and 35 groups. Sometimes you have only one island. Sometimes you have 2, 3, 10, 50 or more island counters. But just to give you an idea, we are adding every year at the request of activators who like to travel to those islands and like to operate from them, and based on a very careful research, on the order of about, I would say, just to make it even, sort of 25 islands per year. Okay, so for the 16,500 island groups, islands, which are already listed in different groups, the fact that we're adding every year 25, maybe 30 islands, it's just a pitiful amount, and we're only doing it, we're not going to do every single, rock just because it exists. But the island has to have a name, it has to have an official, and to be on an official map. So if it's just a tiny little rock on which eventually, an operator and a bird could sit for a few minutes, that wouldn't count, because it probably won't be listed Tillamook Rock or somehow. It has to have a certain, it has to be named. It has to have be on either on a marine chart or on a official chart, official map.
Doing a quick check, it does, and looking on the listing, it looks like there's around 40 in North Carolina.
40.
40 to 42. I did the quick count.
There's two groups.
Yeah.
NAO 67 and NA 112, I know, are out there.
Right. So there's some possibilities there.
Now,
I know we have to do some research, and
for whatever's worth it, I will have to tell you that there's a lot of operators particularly from Japan, but also from Europe. Probably not as much in North America as of yesterday. That would, for which the North American islands would be North American IOTAs would be in high demand. Why? Because they activate it relatively rarely. Like maybe there's an operation every year from North America 112, but it would be for a couple of days, maybe a weekend, maybe a lighthouse, just something. So there are sporadic operations, and I don't know if anybody leaves. There are some islands in Florida, and they have permanent residents. And there might be a couple of hams or one, So so those guys, they will be open to guys going QRZ. They check for island in the name of the and they go and do SCADs and things like that, and so on and so forth. But there's a certain demand, and I honestly believe that if the conditions are such that propagation to Japan would be open, 20 meters, 15, 30 meters, 40 meters, depending on the season, maybe 17 even. I think that you'll be surprised how many stations would look for that particularly if it's popularized sufficiently in advance so that they are aware that whatever call sign it's W4NP/portable, well, it's from there, because otherwise nobody knows.
Well, we'd if we did that, we would certainly plan this well in advance and get some publicity out about it.
Right. So another, there's some hams interested in contesting, and
oh yeah,
you may be well aware of the IOTA contest. I think that the IOTA contest, unfortunately, has a different. Originally, the idea was to stimulate contacts between, islands and island stations and non-island stations. Obviously, there are a lot of people around the IOTA contest who have nothing to do with the IOTA program per se. They're just contesters, and they're happy to contest anytime they can. So, if probably a great idea would be, and I'm not suggesting this, I notice this time and time again, that some people bank a relatively larger period of time, not just the contest period per se, maybe a day in advance or a couple days in advance, maybe, depending on how their work schedules or family schedules allow, and organize something for maybe just a little bit longer, so that it would allow them to give some of these remote areas, New Zealand, Australia, a chance as well, which in contests probably more than likely they won't have any. So I am one of the many activators who are very sensitive to trying, well, if I can make 10,000 contacts, so be it. But I will try my best to catch every single propagation window on the bands that the antenna works on, operates on, with as many areas around the world as possible. So, and from your own personal experience with radio and maybe contesting and so on and so forth, how, propagation starts at some point, and as time moves, you move from the east to the west of Australia, to the eastern Australia, to western Australia, and that's the time when singers from Japan would just die out, and these guys would be, well, some probably not booming with, but they would definitely be, so some IOTA guys are very sensitive to that, and they want the activators to be paying attention to this, which is one of the aim of us trying to, make guys aware that they're probably not going to be a ton of interest in the United States, but there will be a lot outside, because North America 112, it's not that often on the air.
We have several very active contesters in the group. Maybe not as much as they were 10 years ago, but tonight we had one person who took ARRL DX contest. He took the world, operating from Antigua, and we've operated. And one of the things I've loved is during CQ Worldwide at 4 p.m. local time, we tend to open up, assuming sunspots cooperate. We tend to open up to Japan for this window, and I love, especially on 15 meters, and I love to be there for that.
Right.
It's fun because they are just competing fiercely to make that contact, and it's fun. And you the fun from being on the other side when you're actively being called. And so,
well, I am actually myself. I have 1108 confirmed, so I am a very avid chaser, and I'm still struggling to find a way to go to get to 2900 challenge points. But my my antenna conditions on 160 and 80 are modest, and I don't have more than about 500 watts output, so it's not that easy sometimes in the pileup. But
Yeah.
but I'm trying. I had a good season on 6 meters, and I had such a good season on 6 meters. Now I'm getting close to. I have I still need to confirm one, but 87 DXCC on 6, which may not be a big thing for many, but it's 18 more than I had last year this time. And I finally managed 15 new IOTAs on VHF, which is, I still have only 61, which is very far from me. I need to, but I haven't started very, very long ago. And, it offers a chance to still stay involved, I guess. But there's a little bit for everyone. So,
Cesar, I know you operate much like I do in that I do a lot of 160, but I do QRP, and I know you're similar to running QRP, especially if you're just running 100 watts and a vertical out on some island like that. So, I can appreciate that a lot. But
I have
a lot of skill.
on 160. I can use 500 watts, but I'm trying to get the DX. But I just have an inverted V, and I also have for 160 a magnetic loop, which is it's okay. But my only chance is to get the DX before anybody else gets it. So.
That's the key, and with the K3 and using the band scope, that's the only way you can do it, because once you get to watching the signals after a while, you can tell what's a DX signal popping up usually at their signal level, and if you can jump on them quick enough, even with 5 watts, you can get through there and work them. But normally, I can work all 50 states in a weekend with QRP. And I've done that with CW and sideband, and I know you're similar to that with your 100 watts out on an island and a vertical.
Right. There are actually there are a number of guys who are very particular. There's a gentleman there's an Englishman who I think he has close to, it's probably not 900 IOTAs, but it's probably, I think it's probably about 870, 80, something like that. So it's closing at 900. And he operates mobile. So for one reason or another, his rig, his station, everything else is in his van. And he has to take it. He cannot operate from home, from home QTH. It's just the way the neighborhood and so he has to take it and to go outside the city or whatever. I don't know. He has a certain spot where he likes to be. And he doesn't necessarily operate QRP, but his antennas are really somewhat more modest compared to what we have. Very often I know where he lives. I know his neighbors and his neighbors' hands. And whenever I copy the guys around him, I'm just saying, okay, everyone now just stand by one, guys, cool off, stand by. So I'm looking for, and I call his guy, and obviously everybody in Europe keeps yelling. I said, no, stand by. I don't want to hear anybody else, just this guy. And then he comes, sometimes it happened a couple of times, and he comes back and I hear his name is Alan, Golf 4 November X-ray Golf mobile, but the way he pronounces that mobile, it's absolutely unmistakable. So I met the fellow a couple of times, and it's the same with the QRP. It's a particular bug that each one of us got in one way or another, and we just take it to the next level, to the wherever we can, how we can go.
Yeah.
Guys, when you want to close, I I'm still here because I have been a guest, and I don't have anything else scheduled for tonight, and this is why I enjoy being. But when you guys are wanting to sign off, that's fine.
I have a question with running the step hour vertical. Did you notice anything really great about it except being able to change bands quickly versus just your standard vertical that you run?
Well, when we run, I love my step IR. I have to come to tell you this very, very sincerely. It has a very significant directionality, and there's no match to anything else. But this, but I'm living on. You know, I'm actually next to Lake Ontario, but it's not salt water. So, however, when we used the vertical as compared to the urban beam, the 2-element beam on 20 meters, I actually made some. QST didn't accept to publish the article as an article per se. They wanted to have it as an essay, like a photo essay. The new editors are having, so we actually sent a full article I sent a full article to Redcom in England, and they published it, where we actually made some comparisons, which are somewhat empirical. It also, the propagation could have changed a little bit, but we definitely noticed a little bit of an increase in the number of stations we were able to log in Europe over a certain period of time, which was the maximum propagation window when using the beam as compared to the vertical. And if I remember correctly, I think that the difference was by at least 10%. If I remember correctly, it was even 12 or 14 or 15, 12 to 15%, which we consider that was significant. So for 20 meters, when we used in every day, if I remember correctly, the 4-hour, which would be the best propagation time between North America 111, Oregon, and Europe, the number of stations we would log in Europe per 4 hours would be approximately from a day to another, because we use during 2 days we use the beam, the 2-element beam, and one day, the first day, we use on 20 meters we use the vertical. So it would be between 12 and 15% more stations during that period of more QSOs. Sorry, more QSOs during that period of time, which it's I don't remember how many we worked. Let's say we might have worked 200 stations, 300 stations in 4 hours. I don't know. I'm just saying. So that's 50 stations. Yeah, between 250 and 300. Then it's a little bit of a. Now, why I'm saying that this is not necessarily one-to-one, because we do know that there was a change in the K. Not that much in the SFI. There was a little bit of a bump in the SFI in the third day, in the last day. But there was a little bit of a change in the K number and the A numbers. So in the indices. So I'm not sure the conditions were necessarily quite the same. But there was out of question for us to ever put to ever use again the vertical on 20 meters once we had the beam up.
Yeah,
so that's just the bottom line.
Harold and myself, he has an R9 vertical that we just set up in my yard here. Got it all tuned up, and I've got up a 4-element monoband 20-meter quad. And I was comparing signals the other evening. I know what you mean. There was most of the time it was a 3 to 4 S unit improvement jumping to the quad, and when Europe on the vertical, you couldn't even hear them at all. They were S5 on the quad and just perfectly copyable.
That's the other point. The other point is that for the maximum propagation, when the propagation was at its max for whatever it was with different regions, half an hour, the signals from Europe were stronger, right? Now, that for us wouldn't have necessarily been a great deal because we were still able to copy them. We thought we were able to copy them at the rate of maybe missing 15 stations. 12 to 15% of the stations, of the QSOs. But our question was, I don't think they copy us necessarily that well. So we might have been just, and because of that, the guys were calling, they probably thought they got us, but they weren't sure because we didn't end up we didn't send the 73, we didn't send the thank you, the TU. So they were calling again. And that was an indication to us. Yeah, I remember that both day 2nd and day 3rd, day 2, day 3, some of the guys were calling back.
Yeah.
Just to get a so-called reassurance QSO, which I personally hate, but so you're absolutely right. The signals.
And I see that happening on 160 with me running QRP, and you know, I'll make a contact, and the next day a guy will call me again, and I know it's because he probably didn't get the call right the first day.
Right.
He thought he did, but he didn't.
So. Yeah, so in those cases, we just make the contact and move on, but like not gonna comment anything, but again, maybe that was because of the CW. Had we couldn't work. I don't know if we ever made one contact in SSB with Europe on the vertical.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I do remember that one evening, after the propagation with Europe was done, we decided to move the beam on 20 meters to Japan, just to have a little bit of fun. Usually, we would have liked to move to 30 meters for Europe, because Japan, we would have longer propagation with them, and there wasn't really that big of a deal. And, to give another QSO on 20, but we just tried to see, hey, how's the beam going to work to Japan? And that was really just an incredible, the signals from Japan would come, which is so much closer, would really come with high marks, compared to.
Yeah.
So in Europe, you're right. We're probably at least a couple of 1.5 to 2, S points, but. We felt that in the end, just in the rate of contacts, because everything, a lot of guys were in the mud, and you try, you usually, because usually most of us who go on these trips are IOTA chasers as well. So we are familiar with the call signs. Like I'm familiar with, I don't want to say that, but maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 call signs. I would know.
Yeah.
With only 2 letters of the call sign, and I probably would know what the call sign is, particularly because I kind of make an association. This is, I'm copying Oscar Hotel or Sierra Mike, so this is why sometimes we were copying signals. We were copying very, very, signals buried in the mud. But the guys probably had very good reception antennas.
Well, and that's what I figure with QRP on 160.
Right.
They've got some good loops or some kind of receive antenna.
I remember that when I first started with 160, I had this antenna, it's an Alpha Delta product, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a string of wire. And I said, that was the first time I operated on 160, my first contact. And I said, well, listen, I mean, I should be able to make 100 DXCC, because there will be 100 guys out there who have better antennas, and, they'll copy me. I just have to. And it kind of went like that. But once you go above, 200, it's getting a little competition.
Yeah, well, we ran a 160 operation here. I had 3 K3s set up, 2 of them just for receiving, and we're running 1500 watts. And I had 6 receive antennas up, and we couldn't hear the people. There was so many of them would call us, we could hardly pull them out of the pile. And we were 6th place in the U.S. If we'd worked 2 more countries, we'd have made it in that coveted top 5, you know. But that taught me a lesson. And so if I go QRP, I know I've got enough antennas to hear anybody that calls me, and I don't have to worry about receive antennas so much.
Right. Well, I think that for many IOTA operators, IOTA activators, I think that there are quite a few guys out there who are very familiar with the community. So if they copy, WIP, they know that this is going to be whiskey for the PID. They know this is going to be whiskey for PID. They copy, and because if it's the first time, they may have a little bit of a struggle. But once they go the second time, they'll figure it out. And so, and then many of them usually. It used to be long time ago when I was in Romania days, years, my youth, that a lot of the Arctic Russian stations in the former Soviet Union, they'll have all sorts of bases and meteorological stations. God knows what they had, but they were they were permanent, they were manned year round. So it wasn't that big of a deal to work with them except for the propagation conditions, right? Well, nowadays it's the whole thing changed, and now these guys have to go on special trips. Luckily, they have a couple of financiers, and what it's extremely important is, that, in my opinion, is that these operators actually have a very good knowledge of the core clientele. So if they hear 5 Bravo Oscar when the U.S. is, so that part of the southern U.S., whatever, Texas is around, they know there's going to be W5BOS. They don't have to call him 5BO question mark. No. They'll just go right for the call sign. No.
And I think that happens to me a lot because I've operated so much in the contest with QRP that
I am absolutely convinced that it happens.
Because my call shows up in that list on the screen when you put a piece of it in.
You just type a couple of characters, and if you go with a log that is the overall log, then there might be a little bit of a struggle, too many call signs, But if you go with the IOTA operations, and the people try to use that, I mean, there's some, then it's a dedicated thing, and I think the success rate it's quite good.
I'm kind of relatively new on FT8. I've been messing with it for a couple of years. I didn't start it right off, but do you think it really is that much better in low signal conditions than CW?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And well, from a technical point of view, and as a physicist, I do understand this thing. From a technical point of view, it should be.
Yeah.
But I have to confess that last winter, it was on 160, these are guys operating from, 9 Juliet 2 Lima Alpha, something like that?
Well, I didn't get to operate much last year. So.
Yeah, so the 9 Juliet 2 Lima Alpha was something I needed on 160. I needed 9 Juliet. And I was thrilled because they operated CW, they operated FT8, and they were booming in FT8 here. It was like this. And for some reason, I could only work them in CW. Don't ask me why. In theory, there shouldn't have been as many clients. In the pileup shouldn't have been that that messy, and they had a great signal, much better than in CW. But for one reason or another, I don't know. Maybe I'm a lousy operator in FT8, or maybe God knows how they picked them up, how they picked up the stations based on, I don't know.
Well, I've noticed stuff that's in the minus 16 or so. A lot of times you'll only get half the contact through with them. And I know I could have worked them with CW because I'm watching them, on the screen.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, well, I mean, if you shorten it, it will still take 45 seconds.
Yeah.
So it is a long, yeah, you're getting a serious queue. This is another issue, by the way. I had, over the pole, here at my location, it's relatively difficult to work Victor Kilo 9, pretty much any Victor Kilo 9, but in particular, Victor Kilo 9 X-ray, Victor 9 Charlie, they're over the pole, literally over the pole here at this location. And to work them on, well, I never worked them on 80 and 160 on that, any of those. But I was having great difficulty working them on 40. So a couple of years ago, there was an operational, maybe it was last year. No, I think it was like I think it was maybe when I say couple of years, maybe it was very early 2019, like the winter of 2019. Seems like 2 years, but it was actually a year and a half ago. And there were some guys operating, I don't remember now the call sign, but they were operating in both FT8 and CW. And I could see in FT8 how the signals, how the little pings, they start to disperse.
Mm-hmm.
You have a decode, and then it's gone, and it never comes back, or it comes back for another decode. I have no idea what they're doing, And in CW, it takes a few seconds. I got the contact. The same antenna, probably the same power, although I might have put another 100 watts more on in CW because I don't really want to. Although my amplifier here is with tube, so I have no problem in using it on FT8. Still 400 watts, 350, 400 wouldn't be any difference. And no, I could not work them in FT8. So. There's definitely, but if the signal is very low, and if the signal is very low but steady, then probably FT8 would do the trick. But I'm operating like pretty much everyone these days, a lot in FT8 on 6 meters.
Yeah.
And well, it takes a long time to make a contact, Even if I start the contact by not calling that guy with my call sign, but just calling him and giving him a report.
Yeah.
And still, it takes a long time. So it happens so many times that I'm losing that particular station on 6 meters. I cannot make the contact. But when I check to the PSK reporter, he decodes. Well, I'm reported to with a signal.
Yeah.
He gets a decode. God knows at what time, because I probably is not in sync with me.
Yeah.
And it might be just a decode. So but so there's no question that it's not, how should we say, it's not the panacea, it's not it's not the promised land, but it does offer, as I said, last year, for example, I worked, what did I, Sierra United on 80 meters, which for me was a good new one. Because I missed when Vlad was there, UA4 WHX. I worked them on FT8 on 80 meters. And I just couldn't copy the guy on CW. I just couldn't copy. But propagation on 80 meters with my inverted V is such that it would have to be the exact right time, so in a different day it wouldn't work. So how do I know that the conditions are absolutely identical between the day when he was on CW, I couldn't copy him, and the day when I worked him on FT8? I don't.
Yeah.
So, the way I look at this, and I fully understand there are a lot of guys, there are pros and cons, and there are a lot of guys who hate it and a lot of guys who don't. I take it just like, well, and this is by an extension of language, because I know we cannot interpret it in our brain like the SSB or CCW. I cannot convert it. Right? I need a computer. But I need a computer for RTTY, and I'm just too shy of the honor roll and on data. So I don't care, you know. But I would kind of take it as another tool.
Another challenge.
No. That's one thing. No. Not for the challenge of working. But let us suppose that there's an IOTA out there. And I'll give you one example. Asia 107. Asia 107, which is, you wouldn't know that, but I'm telling you, it's in Thailand. It's exactly over the pole. It's 0 from me, you know, and it's been on the, it's been demanded by another issue. By the way, I had over the pole, you know, here at my location, it's relatively difficult to work Victor Kilo 9, pretty much any Victor Kilo 9, but in particular, Victor Kilo 9 X-ray, Victor 9 Charlie, they're over the pole, literally over the pole here at this location. And to work them on, well, I never worked them on 80 and 160 on that, you know, any of those. But I was having great difficulty working them on 40. So a couple of years ago, there was an operational, maybe it was last year. No, I think it was like a couple of, I think it was maybe when I say couple of years, maybe it was very early 2019, like a winter of 2019. Seems like 2 years, but it was actually a year and a half ago. And there were some guys operating, I don't remember now the call sign, but they were operating in both FT8 and CW. And I could see in FT8 how the signals, how the little pings, you know, they start to disperse.
Mm-hmm.
You have a decode, and then it's gone, and it never comes back, or it comes back for another decode. I have no idea what they're doing, you know. And in CW, it takes a few seconds. I got the contact, you know, the same antenna, probably the same power, although I might have put another 100 watts more on in CW, because I don't really want to, although my amplifier here is with tube, so I have no problem in using it on FT8. Nah, still 400 watts, 350, 400 wouldn't be any difference. And no, I could not work them in FT8. So there's definitely, but if the signal is very low, and if the signal is very low but steady, then probably FT8 would do the trick. But I'm operating like pretty much everyone these days, a lot in FT8 on 6 meters.
Yeah.
And well, it takes a long time to make a contact, you know. Even if I start the contact by not calling that guy with my call sign, but just calling him and giving him a report.
Yeah.
And still, it takes a long time, you know. So it happens so many times that I'm losing that particular station on 6 meters. I cannot make the contact. But when I check to the PSK reporter, he decodes. Well, I'm reported to with a signal.
Yeah.
He gets a decode. God knows at what time, because I probably is not in sync with me.
Yeah.
And it might be just a decode. So, you know, but so there's no question that it's not, how should we say, it's not the panacea, it's not it's not the promised land, but it does offer, you know, as I said, last year, for example, I worked, what did I, Sierra United on 80 meters, which for me was a good new one. Because I missed when Vlad was there, UA for WHX. I worked them on FT8 on 80 meters. And I just couldn't copy the guy on CW. Just couldn't copy. But propagation on 80 meters with my inverted V is such that it would have to be the exact right time, so in a different day it wouldn't work. So how do I know that the conditions are absolutely identical between the day when he was on CW, I couldn't copy him, and the day when I work him on FT8? I don't.
Yeah.
So, the way I look at this, and I fully understand there are a lot of guys, there are pros and cons, and there are a lot of guys who hate it and a lot of guys who don't. I take it just like, well, and this is by an extension of language, because I know we cannot interpret it in all brain like the SSB or CCW. I cannot convert it, right? I need a computer. But I need a computer for RTTY, and I'm just too shy of the honor roll and on data, so I don't care, but I would kind of take it as another tool,
another challenge.
No. That's one thing. No. Not for the challenge of working, but let us suppose that there's an IOTA out there, and I'll give you one example. Asia 107. Asia 107, which is, you wouldn't know that, but I'm telling you, it's in Thailand. It's exactly over the pole. It's 0 from me, and it's been on the. It's been demand by only probably about 60% of the IOTA members, which is really not that much. It's somewhat common. And they're guys who operate from there very, very often. Well, I only work that IOTA in FT8. Why? I don't know. It just happened one morning that the guy was working FT8. I just happened to copy him. I called and got back, and that's it. So it's another toolkit. If I want to chase IOTA and I only need one contact in any band, doesn't matter what band, what mode, one contact. Well, if I can do it in CW, I would prefer it. If I cannot do it in CW and I can do it in SSB, I'll take it. If I can do it in FT8, I'll take it. So, I have no idea how many times I try to, there's an operator who, this gentleman from Europe who, it doesn't matter now, operated from some islands of Vietnam. They have 2 IOTA groups, right? Okay. And they also come at a relatively subpolar angle for me, so it's somewhat difficult. And there have been quite a few operations, I just can't copy them. So one day, he was operating CW and was 599, loud as you cannot imagine, was just like incredible. He was there for 1 full week. I never copied him again. Never, ever copied him again.
Yeah. And
that was on 20 meters. That was pre-FT8 era, but so I'm not, I don't go by this idea of, I have to interpret it in the brain and, no.
Do you happen to know VE3LYC?
MGY, right. Personally, but I definitely worked him.
He used to run a lot of QRP, and he could, if he runs it, he's got, all of the US to work and their multipliers. So he could just wipe me out in the contest. And he's finally got tired of fighting the QRM and trying to work QRP, and he's went to 100 watts now. But he was telling me, that from up there, he's got a really quiet location and some bunch of beverages and stuff, and so he can hear a lot of things. But
right. So yeah, this is there's some guys. I'm unfortunately I'm not one of them, who are very specialized in design of these antennas for 160 and 80, particularly 160.
Yeah.
So I think that I can't install here everything I want or whatever I want. It's a little bit of a challenge. But I do recall that once when I operated from some place in the years, it doesn't matter now, I got a request from some station. I'm sure it must have been a Top Gun and on 6 meters. He wanted to send me the equipment so that I can operate from their EME.
Mm.
And I knew nothing at the time. Now I know quite a bit about it. But, you know, and I know you can only operate for so many hours depending on the moon and this and that. And usually there's a period of about count a week, maybe 10 days every month. You know. Well, how did I, you know, was I supposed to schedule my trip? Because I was there only for 4 days.
Yeah.
In mind with the idea that, you know, it's just, I understand that each one of us has specific areas of interest. And sometimes we might intersect a little bit, and then it's fine. But I was, at the time, I was completely unprepared. So now I'm kind of thinking, well, you know, to do an EME, you need about a kilowatt. What kind of, well, I mean, if you use an amplifier with a kilowatt in probably it's going to be JT65, right? And you blew the amplifier for that particular thing, you need to take 2 amplifiers with you, or I wouldn't go otherwise, right? So besides the fact that I have to go in a particular period of time and I have to have multiple operators, one dedicated to this,
yeah.
no way that I could do alone, you know, or that I would miss the opportunity of making that night, I don't know, maybe 300, 400, 500, maybe 800, maybe 1,000 contacts. I don't know.
Yeah.
For maybe 20 in EME, if that many, because I'm not that skilled.
They're doing good, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, it's a very challenging thing. Now, if W7JGJ would go, well, yeah, he knows what he's doing, and he might just get 100 contacts, and you know, so, yeah, it's not easy to do everything. It's,
Cesar, I'm going to have to run. I left a note right quick for Don, our co-host.
Very much. And
I am getting ready to die. My laptop battery is dying. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to leave you in the good hands of Gene and Harold and Sam and Don and all those guys, because
me and
oh gosh, this was great.
I hope that, well, you know, I didn't mention that. I mean, this is, well, I mean, it's still made public, but I don't mention to the full, you know, I still have, you know, a goal of my own. And that is to make 20 IOTAs that would be top 10 DXCC equivalent, because I don't think that that might be quite challenging some of those DXCC big guns, big activators. I don't think that it's that easy to have had. I know that Bob W4UE had, K4UE had top 10, but 20 top 10, I know it's not top 10, you know, but it's the XCC equivalent.
Yeah, right.
It's a very challenging thing. So I still need 2 more, and unless this pandemic dies out, or we can manage it somehow.
It'll go away. It'll go away.
Well,
yeah, but I'm getting older, so I don't want to run out of steam, you know.
If you stay at it hard, you can get it, though, and you got to be a super good operator to do what you do. I kept at it on 160, and finally one year the VEs didn't play hard. The Germans and people in Europe didn't, and I got first place world. But I'll never get that again in my life. You know, it's took me a whole lifetime to do that on 160 QRP. So you'll get there.
But I think, Gene, that you actually hit the nail, well, or I can understand or interpret exactly as you hit it, exactly on the nail on his head. You are at that level and you're competing at that level. Sometimes it may actually take a little bit of magic to kind of get it.
Yeah, yeah. Because the Canadians, if they play hard, they get more multipliers. If the Europeans do, they get more because the countries are closer to them.
Exactly.
And, you know, if I can work 13 or 15 countries in a weekend QRP in Europe, I'm doing really good. And, you know, they may have 30 or 40. So their multipliers just wipe me out. And
well, to give you an example of my, you know, own suffering, of my own, you know, every time I need so many DXCC in Europe that every time I'm getting propagation with Europe, it's highly likely that I'm going to get at least one, you know. I only have, you know, so 87 of which vast majority is all the Caribbeans and, you know. So, and, you know, when they have when they put this propagation charts and all these, you know, DX maps and everything that, you know, I look at Europe and indeed, it's relatively easy to go around. You know, for us, what do we have? A couple of DXCCs. I mean, okay, Canada, continental US, and then you have Mexico, and that's it. So it's kind of the same. I assume that the way the multipliers play, unless you go, and I don't know if you've ever been to that, you know, what they call it, the world WRTC.
yeah, I know about it, but I've never had any dealings with it.
Right. Well, those guys, yeah, I guess they are as of a level playing field as you can imagine. They have all 100 watts, and it's all, but it's not entirely just operating skills. It's also the tactics, because some guys do know, I mean, I know from friends who participated in this competition, and they may not be necessarily number one and number two, but they are very competitive. They are in the group of, you know, somewhere in the middle there. You know, if you know, if you have knowledge of the propagation in Europe, if you have on the team someone who is from Europe, for instance, and they know this and they studied this, they would know, depending on the time of the day and this and that and so on and so forth, that the guys, you know, this is now good to go 80, this is now good to go 40, this is at the end, they should all be there, and I don't know, they'll finish by this band. So it's something to have all the forecasts in the world there, and something else to have the actual, you know, knowledge of. Now, probably it would make a difference if, I mean, the guys who would be top or second, you know, the top winners, they probably above this little things. But if you're in the middle of the pack, it's probably a pretty long way between 10 and 30 out of 50 contacts is, you know, 50 pairs or something, 50 teams. You can be, you know, in all that range. It depends a lot on the actual knowledge of propagation, of habits, if it takes place in Europe versus if it takes, the competition takes place in the States. So it's like any other sporting event, you know. It's not just, it's a lot of other knowledge that gets into it. This is why I kind of said that the best you can possibly do is be very competitive into something that you like. Now, whether you really can end a second time in the top place, well, I certainly wish you good luck, but it's not, there are a lot of factors that go into that, and
oh yeah,
a tiny little grain that they had sometimes in swimming, if you recall, to separate the guys, they used the milliseconds, not just the 10th of a second, but they used some millisecond. You know, it's crazy. I mean, if he takes that, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say it's exactly the same, but yeah, it's a lot of things that enter into this, and I have done some contests with very modest possibilities and obviously relatively modest results in my youth when I used to be Yankee Oscar, but never since, because I would probably don't like to. I would have liked to be somewhat fighting for not being number one, but at least in the top, I don't know, 10, 5, and that would be very difficult and would require training, would require a lot of other, you can't do this and that and this and that and this and that. You have to dedicate a lot of time to perfect both the tools and the skills. So
I've got to run, but it's been enjoyable. I liked your program very much and what you do there.
Pleasure was all mine, Jane. Thank you guys very much for inviting me, and I'll probably sign off myself.
If you will, write down something, W4TMR, and look up his loop in QST. That's what I use on 160, and I've tried everything that's ever been invented. That thing makes the difference of getting the signals out there or not.
W4TMR?
Yeah, it's a delta loop, but the way it's fed, it turns it into a unipole, and it's omnidirectional.
Right.
It ends up being 90 foot on a side, roughly. And I've got 90-foot radials laying under it.
I wrote it down, yeah. Thanks.
If you don't put the radials, it's actually just an 80-meter loop. But if you put the radials, it resonates on 160. And that thing just works super good. It's completely non-directional. That's all I use. But you're talking about your 160 stuff. You might want to try that.
I will check it out.
Well, 7-3s, thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Good night, Gene.
Love you later.
Cezar.
I'll see you, Gene.
Cezar.
Yes.
This is Harold. Look, I have recorded the whole podcast. If you would like a copy of it, I can put it up on Dropbox and you can download it.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
And Cezar, if you would, I'd really like, I'll send you an email, but I'd like a copy of the slides so we can put something together for the newsletter a little better. And this will be on YouTube, but I'm running a month behind or better on getting those out there. So
that's all right. You guys are doing fabulously. So congratulations. I mean, I was impressed to see that you either celebrated or will celebrate this year sometimes the 90th anniversary of the group.
Yeah.
And you put a little bit, quite a bit of my own bio in your newsletter, for which I thank you very much. But I have to confess that when I opened my eyes to the world, it was first through the QSL cards of my father, and that's how I started learning the letters, the figures, the the numbers. I knew, well, my father guided me through a map when I was barely speaking, and I had great memories of those times. And my father happened to be one of the founders of the, I think he was the first, if I remember correctly, the first secretary of the first Romanian National Amateur Radio Association. The first Romanian regional associations occurred long before, like many years in the, I think, early 20s or something like that. But the National Association, I think, started in, if I remember correctly, in 1936. And I was kind of thinking, because my father, after the World War II, wasn't keen to, there was a change in the political everything there, and he preferred to stay quiet. And, so, and then on the 30th anniversary of that moment, he was invited by the new Romanian Amateur Radio Federation, whatever, along with some other old timers, to join the membership. And they said, well, you know, for you guys, you're not going to have to pass any tests. No, we're just going to automatically give you the licensing, which was a pretty darn, you know, good deal at the time. And I'm kind of, you know, I mean, time flew, and I couldn't stop thinking, since I've seen that 90 there, that a few years from now, I mean, I hope that all of us will make it, but, you know, there will be 90 years in Romania until, you know, since they had their first association. And I still have on, I put on my website a photo. It shows my father along with a few other guys, one of them being the president of the ARRL. Back in, I think, 37, the photo is from the QST. There was an article that they published because the head of the the president of the ARRL at the time, came, I think, to acknowledge the new arrival in the amateur, in the, you know, world. I don't know if Yarrow was by then, or there's the name, or I don't know, whatever the organization was at the time. And that was, you know, Romania as a nation. The call signs had been previously, there were different call signs, so they changed things, so a lot of things. So it takes me, the 90 years anniversary, it takes me to some memories of my own, which are obviously very vague, and they don't, there's somewhat association with the pre-World War in the 30s. Let's put it this way. So nothing really that old as your group, but you know, still it's still very, very impressive, and reminds me of those days anyway, that I've been young and started to learn the Morse code. You know.
It helps when you start early. So yeah. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important that we recognize the history of what's happened. And I personally have done a lot of digging into what's happened here in Forsyth County. The earliest QSL card we've come up with was from 1912. And he was, interestingly, around 12 or 14, I think 14 at the time. Mm-hmm. And the term QSL didn't even exist then. Mm-hmm. But there were a fair amount of people active here in this county in the 20s, teens and 20s, and mm-hmm. I've probably collected about 1,000 QSL cards from teens, 20s, 30s, 40s that have actually been out in the world and come back. So we try to honor that history.
It's good. I think it's part of, in the end, it's part of who we are. It's part of humanity, and it's part of our hobby, and it's part of ourselves in the end, because we grew out of this, well, directly or indirectly, we were influenced by all, you know, these guys are the pioneers, you know.
Yeah, and it is hard for us to relate back to that period in time when, you know, in the 1919s, 1920s, and along in that range, when a 5-mile journey took a day.
Right.
And had, you know, hitch up the horses literally, and and so the world was just this vast place. And when radio came along, and the magic that it introduced into people's life is, I think, underappreciated a lot in terms of how it's changed society and people and things.
Oh, it's I cannot agree more. And sure, there's been a tremendous achievements over the last probably couple of decades.
Yeah, there was a school teacher in here tonight, and he had, he's a technology instructor, and he had asked his students, mostly, I think they go up to 9th grade there, what they thought of radio and could they really do without radio. And they said, oh yeah, we don't need radio. He said, give me all your cell phones.
Right. So
there's an underappreciation for the magic that's there.
Yeah, everything was, you know, one thing leads to another. and everything we do comes out of what others did, and we take it to the next step. And you know, there's a chain, and we better continue to dream and bring as much as we can in everything we do, not just the hobby, but
Carl Sagan made a statement in his program on Cosmos, and as a physicist, I think you can appreciate this. And I one time sat down and did some back of envelope calculations, and he's absolutely right. When you're out there in those icy places and things, he made the comment that the energy of a single snowflake hitting the ground is millions of times greater than what is coming into the antenna. He was referring to radio astronomy, and he's right. And that's just absolute magic to me.
Yeah, I was I had some moments of my own when I was involuntarily due to weather, you know, adverse weather, and you know, rapidly changing weather conditions, left all by myself in the Arctic for a number of days and nights. And as a city boy, I don't have the survival skills. And this was very early in the process. In the meantime, I don't know if I learned that much, but something might have rubbed off of the guides I have been with, and, you know, administering food and rations and so on and so forth. But I had no water, no drinkable water, nothing whatsoever, no source of heat, none whatsoever. And I was in a very warm, I had very warm winter camping equipment. There was not a problem. It wasn't cold at all. It was very frigid outside, but there was no problem inside. And the disaster hit when the gas finished and the generator couldn't run anymore. And then my mind, I was, you know, forget about the bears, forget about anything. I thought the bears were miles and miles, like thousands of or hundreds of miles away. That never crossed my mind. I was just trying to decipher that call sign to pick up that thing and log it, and then nothing else, you know. But once everything finished, I was just alone with myself, and my mind started to be my enemy. I just could not forgive myself from not having insisted that we take twice as much gas, that so that I can remain preoccupied. That I said, well, you know, I'm on this island. They will take you. By the way, this happened about 12 years ago, and there hasn't been anybody going back since. God knows how long it's going to take someone else to travel here. And I'm sitting around doing nothing for days, and I cannot operate because I don't have gas.
Yeah.
You know, it's just as stupid as you can possibly think. But my guide had a plan, and I entrusted him with a plan. I didn't like the idea that we didn't have enough provisions, but I said, hey, well, you know, he knows better. And, well, he didn't know better, actually. And obviously, in all those hours of thinking and tormenting myself and this and that, yeah, you're just alone with nature in the in the infinity of space and the immensity of time, and yeah, the mind starts.
A historian referred to that as the tyranny of isolation. How radio has changed.
For me, it wasn't necessarily the fact that I felt somehow, you know, very, you know, unhealthy, very oppressed, but it was this, how should I say, sense of helplessness, where I can't do anything. I can't make fire. I can't do anything. Like there's nothing, you know, I rely entirely on others. I was not prepared for anything like that. And with everything that I know, with all the energy that comes in my mind, there's still, I'm powerless.
I cannot relate on that level, but first off, I love winter. I love hiking and stuff in winter. I'm too old to do it now, but I've had that feeling being stranded on a ridge and out of water. And it rained that night. I had everything that would collect water out.
Right. It happened to me when I was a kid in some of these summer trips, but well, luckily it was winter and it was cold, so there was hardly any, I guess, transpiration or.
You're just a small speck in a giant world.
That's pretty much the feeling. And the only thing that related me to the world was a probably almost half discharged ATV battery that I decided to take with me as a let it be there. As we went out the door, me and the guide and I, and that battery, which allowed me to operate with probably, I don't know, 1 watt, whatever was possible, I had a SCAD, and every organized at a certain time of the day, and the station who would be in touch with me was someone from VE7, would have to phrase his question as to the most likely answer for me being that I do not reply. So if the question, let's say, was such like, I do not reply to yes, I only reply to no, and the question would have to be phrased, and he would be doing all the talking, and I would only signal my presence at the beginning, and if I would lose him, so, but he was pumping a kilowatt and threw in the, with a beam into, and I was, as I was told by the end of it, as I counted, must have been at least 40 guys from the States and Canada who called I guess the term is search and rescue. So somehow the information got to the search and rescue that this guy was there and the natives are just not picking him up, and how long is he going to make it? So there's some interesting moments, and
interesting is one way to phrase it.
Yeah, I think that once you go over them, you don't think you're invincible, but you have a different tolerance for risk. It's almost like, most of us can probably, well, if we are reasonably healthy, we can probably withstand a lot more beating than we normally imagine. So yeah, it's not pleasant. It's not what I wished, but I can take it. Yeah. So I don't like throw it at me, but if I'd be in that situation, so I have been in a few other, at least 2, 3 other very edgy situations, but I prefer to put a lot more thought into designing a project, and a lot more thought into the contingencies to limit, if not eliminate completely, but to drastically limit the risks associated with, significant mishaps. But as I mentioned to you, I cannot possibly imagine what that guy must have felt, Lenny W5BOS, when he was on this island. I think it was called Seal Island. I think is North America 121. He switched on the radio, made a QSO, and then the rig died. And that was the end of it.
That had to be the pit of despair, absolute despair.
And he couldn't do a thing because his flight was got there with some natives, so he obviously had to go back. But the village or whatever the settlement he flew to he was scheduled to depart a week later. So this, wouldn't be cost effective to, maybe they didn't even have a different flight, so it's just a total, yeah. So, yeah.
Lisa, let me ask you about your antenna.
Yes.
Your stepper, I noticed you were using the step IR, and then I noticed you had an antenna looked like a fishing pole.
Yeah.
How did you tune that fishing line and compared to the stepper? I know the step IR has a built-in coil and automatic servo. So which antenna worked better, by the way?
Now,
and how did you tune that antenna?
Okay, that particular antenna that we used on Tillamook was we only used it for 20 meters, so we didn't wire it to go 17, 21, 17 or 50 meters. No. So the antenna would have worked had we installed it properly, but we decided from the get-go that the conditions were such that it was not worth operating 17, 15. We're not going to, the results would be just negligible, so forget about it. Just focused on 20 meters, operate as much as you can, primarily for Europe, because that was, we could get United States on 40 meters all night long. It's not a big issue. But the other antenna that I had, which is a multi-band, it's a multi-band vertical, right? It has 3 radials, and the radials are also used as guy wires. Okay? And there's no traps. So it's a full, it's a full antenna. It's a full vertical for each of the bands, right? It operates from 10 to 40 meters. So the idea is that I tune the antenna such that if you want to go from 40 to 30, you disconnect some, you remove some contacts. And the antenna would automatically.
Do you have a coil on that? Is there a coil at the bottom of that?
There's a little bit of a coil. There's a tiny little coil for 40 meters.
Oh yeah, because
I don't want to have it too long.
So it's about 34 feet or so.
That is correct. But other than that, there's no coil for 30. There's no coil for anything else, right? And the beautiful thing about the way the antenna works, although I tune it to be 1-to-1 in the CW portion, right?
Right.
It didn't have a high. It had a very good, like 1 to 1.3 SWR on 14 to 60, which is the iota frequency for SSB. Yeah. It wasn't that bad. And if you don't have anything around, such as metal structures, or if you're in the boonies, like red rocks and nothing else, it does nothing to change that SWR. It's perfect. It's as designed, as tested, identical. Well, virtually identical, right? So the big advantage with that, obviously the antenna is very flimsy. It can break. I mean, it withstood, it does stand to about 60, 70 kilometers an hour winds. So that will be, what is that? Eh?
Goodness. That's a lot of wind.
That's a lot of wind. But if it does go into the 80, 100s, it can eventually snap. Now, it never snapped, actually, as a matter of fact, never broke. But if you go in the Arctic areas, sometimes you have those temperature reversals that lead to ice accumulation. Well, sometimes, we call it here, I mean, you don't have them where you are, but we call it here freezing rain. So it's cold, but when it hits the ground,
Right.
The air, it's a little hotter above, warmer above, but when it hits the ground, it just freezes, and this accumulates, and eventually the ice builds up, and it's going to create some thick sheets of ice all around, and if the wind blows, it will snap. It does snap. The good news about it is that it's very easy to fix. I mean, coming home, you can replace the whole leg, but there, it's just a piece of wire. Like, you're just you have some extra wire, just put it back and make sure that you don't.
It looked like the outer sheath was telescoping fiberglass.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Right, but when the ice builds up on that, I had ice on that was half an inch.
Hey, we do have freezing rain here. Not often, but we.
You do have that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't expect that. But when you do have half an inch of that, that fiberglass will snap.
Yeah.
It did snap, and what can I say? Well, I had to fix it with some wooden blankets, some just like you use for the bones. If you break your leg,
I'll make a splint.
Yeah, like a splint thing. Yeah. But the issue is that it's very heavy. Like, it's incredibly heavy compared to because you have to put some a little bit of to link them together with a little bit of kind of a steel wire, so nothing is heavy, but the splints would be, I don't know, about 1.5 feet, and you put maybe 6 of them, and then at that time I think we had 2 or 3 brakes, so I had to put several of them, and it's so heavy you can't move it. It's really it's very, very, very heavy, and then you're afraid that if the wind is going to blow again, it's going to break, and it's going to be the end of it. This is why you have to bring 2, 3 with you. Make sure that
you do what you have to do.
The other issue that we had, and I'll go to the performance in a second, I had with this antenna is that as we used to go to some of these, not boulders, but a lot of beaches that have particular low tide, there's a lot of rocks, they're very heavy rocks, rough rocks. If somehow the birds, and some of them are very annoying and definitely smart, they know how to piss you off. They chew the thing, and they chew the anchors, and the antenna falls. And, if it falls once, twice, you can break, And because I didn't have the contingency at the time, and I never imagined this, I had to fix it with bird bones, remains of, which is just a bit, and it doesn't. It's something absolutely not very reliable, But if you do what you have to do.
The cause of the problem was part of the solution.
Yeah, I thought of that myself.
But I think that and you would have a knowledge. North Carolina, you have a lot of coastline there, so very close to salt water. The use of a vertical in conditions such as perfect flat horizon and saltwater table right there, it's probably just as good as my beam here in Kingston.
Not too bad. I think we would have solved that with a slingshot, probably.
Well, I noticed that the number of guys now, and there's an increasing number of guys who use. I've seen Russians doing that. I've seen the guys from the West Coast doing that. They have this almost like a blip, like a balloon, and they. I'm not sure what kind of winds those things, withstand, but it seems to me that I keep them operating, and seem to be fine. They go to a certain height, throw a pretty good antenna. I don't know, I guess. The issue with us, though, was that there was definitely a directionality, and I would tend to say there was at least 1.5, maybe 2, difference in how we would, the reception we would have with the beam, with the 2-element beam, compared to at least 1.5 compared to the dipole.
Is that because of the height?
No, I think it was just because of the directivity they would have. That, you know, the energy would be.
I see.
Yeah, so, you know, but the this antenna is only directional, the other one isn't, right? It's just as simple as that. But I think that the major difference is we noticed at the peak of the propagation. When the peak of the was supposed to be the peak of the propagation, I don't know, let's say an hour and a half, when Europe would be really booming. Well, they would be booming on this antenna on the beam, and they would be just fine on the other. You know, so I guess in the end, because you know, with the marginal signals, I don't think that it was much of a difference. You know, if the signals were 1.5 points, 1 or 2, even 2 points, as we would still pick them up, I guess, most of them. But what I mentioned is that in the 4-hour period, when we had the propagation from Oregon to Europe, pretty much good on 20 meters, when we would be using the beam, we would be working maybe another 12 to 15%, yeah. I think, was our QSOs in the same amount of time. So, which is from a statistical point of view, it has to deal with the fact that the weaker signals would get more easily into the mud, you know, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them. And every now and then you would be able to distinguish something with the beam. So it was clearly an improvement. There's no question about it, you know. But
there was something I learned years ago with a 4-element beam on 10 meters. And I used to have an antenna switch that would switch between the horizontal and the vertical.
Right.
And when the signals would go up to S9 or above, I could switch, and then when they would take a dive, you know, go to the bottom, right, you could change polarity, and they would be back up at the top.
Right.
And then as soon as they went back down, you could change the polarity back.
Right.
And they'd be right back up at the top. So there's a flip-flop in the signal there too.
What I do remember though is that you know, we have received much better reports, you know, on the DX Summit, on the cluster, you know, when we had, in the very last day, when both the propagation conditions were a little bit better and we had the beam. So, and generally speaking, I remember that at some point I mentioned that at some point we just decided to do a test. We only did it once for probably half an hour, maybe less, when we kept using 20 meters for Japan, when we would have preferred to move to 30 meters for Europe at the time. And because we could only have, well, we could have had 3 stations on the air, but one of them was FT8, you know. So we had 1 station on the 20, and when the conditions were to be 30-40, then we had to abandon 20 meters, or maybe do FT8 on 20 meters because, you know. But we decided to do a test for Japan, and I've never heard the signals from Japan in Tillamook booming like they were booming on 20 meters with the beam. So, like even more prominent, probably just the way the skip went or whatever, than with Europe, you know. In Europe, wasn't a 4-element, wasn't a 5-element, was a 2-element. So was some difference.
Yeah.
But with Japan, it was closer, and we were copying them well. But this was absolutely just stunning the way the signals were coming. I think that in the end, to install the antenna that I have, the vertical, the multi-band vertical, it probably takes, to be honest, 15 minutes. Now you could do it in 10, but if you could probably do it in less than 10. But if you really want, you see what I like to do, the fiberglass poles have some UV protection thing on it, whatever. What happens is that there's an infinitesimally small paste on that I know that it sounds very strange, but with the temperature difference between day and night, it does tend, and the humidity, it does tend to produce enough relaxation or not dilation, contraction, just infinitesimal enough that the thing slides. So in order, if I pull the telescopic fiberglass, it's not enough. So what I'd like to do to secure it, I'd like to tape every single pair of telescopic fiberglasses. So to do that, I guess in the end, because with the marginal signals, I don't think that it was much of a difference. If the signals were 1.5 points, 1 or 2, even 2 points, as we would still pick them up, I guess, most of them. But what I mentioned is that in the 4-hour period, when we had the propagation from Oregon to Europe pretty much good on 20 meters, when we would be using the beam, we would be working maybe another 12 to 15%, I think, was our QSOs in the same amount of time. So, which is from a statistical point of view, it has to deal with the fact that the weaker signals would get more easily into the mud, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them. And every now and then you would be able to distinguish something with a beam. So it was clearly an improvement. There's no question about it,
But there was something I learned years ago with a 4-element beam on 10 meters. And I used to have an antenna switch that would switch between the horizontal and the vertical.
Right.
And when the signals would go up to S9 or above, I could switch, and then when they would take a dive, go to the bottom, you could change polarity, and they would be back up at the top.
Right.
And then as soon as they went back down, you could change the polarity back.
Right.
And they'd be right back up at the top. So there's a flip-flop in the signal there too.
What I do remember though is that we have received much better reports, on the DX Summit, on the cluster, when we had, in the very last day, when both the propagation conditions were a little bit better and we had the beam. So, and generally speaking, I remember that at some point I mentioned that at some point we just decided to do a test. We only did it once for probably half an hour, maybe less, when we kept using 20 meters for Japan, when we would have preferred to move to 30 meters for Europe at the time. And because we could only have, we could have had 3 stations on the air, but one of them was FT8, So we had 1 station on the 20, and when the conditions were to be 30-40, then we had to abandon 20 meters. or maybe do FT8 on 20 meters because, but we decided to do a test for Japan. And I've never heard the signals from Japan in Tillamook booming like they were booming on 20 meters with the beam. So, even more prominent, probably just the way the skip went or whatever, than with Europe. In Europe, wasn't a 4-element, wasn't a 5-element, was a 2-element. So, was some difference.
Yeah.
But with Japan, it was closer, and we were copying them well. But this was absolutely just stunning the way the signals were coming. I think that in the end, to install the antenna that I have, the vertical, the multi-band vertical, it probably takes, to be honest, 15 minutes. Now you could do it in 10, but if you could probably do it in less than 10. But if you really want, what I like to do, the fiberglass poles have some UV protection thing on it, whatever. What happens is that there's an infinitesimally small paste on that I know that it sounds very strange, but with the temperature difference between day and night, it does tend, and the humidity, it does tend to produce enough relaxation or not dilation, contraction, just infinitesimal enough that the thing slides. So in order, if I pull the telescopic fiberglass, it's not enough. So what I'd like to do to secure it, I'd like to tape every single pair of telescopic fiberglasses. So to do that, well, that takes, I don't know how many they are, maybe 8. It takes at least a minute. Well, it takes another 10 minutes, right?
But you could solve that by just drilling a hole through it and put a pin in.
I know, but then
that might destroy your wind resistance too. That's a fracture point.
But yeah. So there are pros and cons. However, this beam, which wasn't tested before we left, it took about, I would say, initially about 4 hours to put it together.
I see.
Then the guys realized that they didn't have any of the connectors. They had to manufacture the connectors on site. And they made a mistake on one of the wires. I don't know, because I was working at the time. I was operating at the time. They were dealing with this, right? And they didn't know. They had to investigate it. So they probably lost by the end of it. It took, I would say, to be honest, over 6 hours to have the antenna up.
Yeah, wow.
So, between 15, 20 minutes and 6 hours, there's a huge difference, right? Now,
just before you go.
Because we were 4, we had 2 guys operating, and you guys just pull around with the antenna until you do it, right?
Yeah.
But let's suppose you'd have been alone. Which antenna do you choose?
We've done that, haven't we, Don?
Yes.
At field day.
Yeah, well, on CQ Worldwide, we decided to operate from a mountain location and moved everything up there the day before, and we took along a brand new beam. Mm-hmm. They left the mast mounting plate out of the box.
Right.
And we called the factory and got somebody to fax it to Little Town, and we found some little machine shop to build it. Well, what they faxed was a Xerox copy.
Right.
And they're not dimensionally accurate. So even though we got a plate built, and just the nightmares that go like that.
Well, this beam came with a plate with a leg a plate for the leg so that you could install it, secure it with some kind of a guy wires, let's say, but God knows where you're supposed to secure them with on top of the lighthouse. But anyway, but it had a self self-supporting leg, like unfortunately, the leg had a bolt right at the bottom, which would have fixed the plate to the leg. That was missing.
Mm-hmm.
We looked for it. We asked if the guys checked. No, this is that what Step IR gave me. Okay, well, didn't we say to check it out? Well, listen, guys. I mean, I just got it. But even, had we had that bolt, we couldn't have installed the antenna as such because there's no way to install guy wires. There were no conditions to properly put them because the antenna was relatively heavy. I mean, was not a couple pounds type thing. It was a heavy antenna. There was no way to secure it. So what we decided to do in the end, all around the lighthouse, there was once upon a time some railing. Now the railing was all gone, long ago. But what was still remaining, what was still standing, were the some of the poles that kept the railing. Some of the little poles. So when we say little poles, you're talking about probably maybe 2.5 foot long poles.
Yeah, I saw those in your presentation.
Which were absolutely rusted. Like they were, you were afraid to lean too much, But we found one which was good. I mean, you could put your entire weight on it and that thing wouldn't break, not right then and there, And we decided to secure it, so it was not that high. We put some other guy wires there just in case, but they were a mock. There was nothing serious. So just the way we installed it there was okay for, I guess, 2 or 3 days. But I can, I can see the nightmare of trying to fix something like this on a reinforced concrete reinforced platform that you're not going to be able to break, you're not going to be able to dig into, you're not going to be able to drill into, you're not going to be able to do anything because they don't allow you to do anything anyway. So, but I would use that urban beam or any kind of beam. Again, we're not necessarily experts in antennas, but on 20 meters, the way we used it, I would use it at any time against what we had. The beauty with this antenna that I have is that it doesn't require a tuner. It's perfectly tuned. The only thing you do, you just have to go on the out, take it down. It takes because you don't have to remove the radials, i.e. guy wires, equal guy wires. But you just lean it a little bit. You take it down. You remove those things. You put it back up. Usually it takes, let's say, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. But if it's cold outside, you could do it in 30 seconds or 40 seconds because the only 3 points you need to take, and then you put it back. If it doesn't, the wind doesn't blow, it takes, let's say, 1 minute or 2. If the wind blows, that's a little bit more challenging. You have to see which part the wind blows, kind of be careful. But, it's it's a very simple, I think that in my opinion, the most advantageous element about that antenna is the fact that if something breaks, if something happens to it, you'll fix it.
It's easy to fix, yeah.
Yeah, it's and without any change in performance, virtually. There's no, what are you gonna do? Nothing. You're not gonna lose anything. Whereas if something happens now, probably with a very good antenna, it's much less of a chance for some mishap to occur. But, you know, it occurs.
Easier to carry on that airplane too, or helicopter or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of ideas. Send this ahead of time, sure, and then you're gonna find it.
Right.
Like, you know, I was in a trip from Honiara, which is on Guadalcanal. That's the New Hebrides, right? To Duff Archipelago, which is actually no, sorry. From sorry, no, I made a mistake. From what's the name? What is H40? It's not Solomon. It's one province in this Temotu. So from the capital of Temotu to Duff Island, which is the most remote place in Temotu. It's about 170 kilometers. So it's a little over 100 miles.
Wow.
And you have to go with someone who knows what he's doing, because the only chance is a motor canoe. Right?
Right. I could understand that.
Right. And, you know, you have to take a generator, because there's no way to go there without the generator.
Yeah,
You're just not going to be able to do anything, you know. You can take some batteries, but they're pretty heavy. So, you know, but I had generator, and I also had at least a battery, because on a deep cycle battery, I can probably work about 1,000 contacts. I can make 1,000 contacts. So in the worst case scenario, if the gas generator dies and I cannot, well, I'm going to fix it in the middle of nowhere. I don't know. I'm going to waste a lot of time. I have one fully charged battery, right? So anyway, how much of an antenna can you take with you in that boat before it sinks? Because, you know, so when we returned, we went to an island called Pigeon. This is where the first operation from Temotu took place, the H40 Alpha Alpha. Yeah. And it's a beautiful resort. It's just it's a private resort. It's just a private island. And from there to Lata, which is where the airport takes you from to go back to Honiara. Probably, well, under normal conditions, it's a 2-hour boating, yeah. And this tiny little canoe, 2-hour boating. But we were after, the sea was very stormy. And it wasn't a cyclone or anything. It was beautiful outside, but there was a lot of currents and things. And so this was one of the most unsettling, you know, trips I've ever had. You could see that, well, the guy was extremely experienced, because he took me, he's the only guy going 2-3 years, every once in 2-3 years or less to Duff. Other than that, they have their own guys going to Duff. So there's some, like if somebody is very sick and they have to bring it, they bring it the same way, praying for luck. So anyway, so in this only 2 hours, so this was a short while. This is just like maybe, don't remember how much it was, maybe about 50 kilometers, if that much, 2 hours. You could see the guy trying to ride the top of the waves. That's what he was trying to do. But every now and then, just randomly, he was up on top, and the way things go, the boat would be sliding down, because the wave would be so much steeper than what the boat can the power. So then the guy wouldn't power it off, because he wouldn't want to get out of the water or reverse it, go backwards, right? So he just let it go and then catch the wave. And when somehow another wave would come and would try to, then he would he would accelerate. So it was really something out of a terrible story. And I remember that I always had in my mind, see, I have all these, I had all these dry bags with me. But all the equipment was in dry bags, everything was in dry bag, Why the log? I didn't have the log on the computer because I didn't have a computer. There was too much power, too much energy. I had the log on paper, but the paper log was not in a dry bag.
Oh, no.
And I said, listen, if this thing sinks, what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump for equipment. There's no way. How I'm going to get from my case, how I'm going to get the paper log. And but there's nothing you can do because the boat would do this and then would go this and would slide back and the guy. So then when we finally, 2 hours later, I asked him, well, listen, now I'm off. I have probably about 70 kilos, the equipment and everything else. Well, I had the amplifier with me, so probably altogether at least another 20, 25 kilos, so say almost 100 kilos. Are you going back alone with the boat tonight? There's no money in the world for me to drive back on this ocean. Not tonight. It's not
at night. No, I wouldn't do that either.
Right. And speaking about this, a few days ago, I've read about a story that some guys who were heading from, I think, Pulap, which is in Micronesia, Federative States of Micronesia, they had an engine problem and they went to another one of these atolls, and somehow I think if I remember correctly, they knew that the guys, because there was some word, there was some SOS. They wrote an SOS on the sand, and somehow I think the Australian, maybe I don't know exactly, but some Australian. I saw an Australian helicopter pilot on
That was lucky.
Yeah, like we had the distances between these atolls, I think, were about 30 kilometers or something like that. So we were tons, like the distances from Duff to Pigeon, I think it's just about 100 kilometers from Duff to Pigeon, and maybe 110 kilometers. And then it's another probably 50, 60 kilometers from Pigeon Island to Lata. So, but there's no other way to get there unless you had all the time in the world at your disposal, and you've been willing to wait for maybe a boat at some point, like a big boat at some point. Right. Some cargo stuff would go there, but when you're coming back.
Sounds like you had more fun doing the trips than you did with the DX.
Absolutely. I love the trips. It's very, it's unique. It's like who's going to Lata, by the way, and who's going to Duff. And see, the guys on Duff Island, they leave. There's a settlement on the island, but the vast majority of the population leaves on 4 or 5, I think 4 small islands, artificial islands made before the first Europeans came out of the coral. So they figured out somehow, they're hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that the mosquito infestation is not as bad if they are further at sea, which is why they build this, hundreds of meters into the ocean. Still, probably, I assume that, not I assume, I saw that at low tide, you can see the foundation of this little island, let's say, right? But the island is about, roughly, I would say about 100 meters by 100 meters. So was that 300 feet by 300 feet? roughly. It's yeah, it's not, it's somewhat squarish, let's say, but that's it, right? And they have about 100 people living there, which represents probably more than half of the population of Duff. They probably have about 160 people, 170 people altogether.
Yeah.
But the school is in the settlement that is on the main island. So every morning, there's someone, there isn't a big distance. Let's say maybe a couple 100 meters, maybe, I don't know, depends, low tide, high tide, let's say 200-300 meters. Eh? So every morning there's somebody boating these guys back and forth, because the largest amount of kids are actually on this tiny little island. So other than the fact that about 6-7 years prior to me getting there, some researchers they work with on, primitive populations of, some researchers from, I think, Japan, they work with on the populations of oceanic islands, whatever, gave them a few, as presents, a few solar panels, but small solar panels. Solar panels they could only use for some tiny radio, and also they would put some light bulbs on some LCD bulbs, some LCD bulbs on them. So at night, for instance, they would be able to stay longer in the huts, around, because there was a little bit of light and they didn't have to use other kind of things, So other than that, they lived probably pretty much how they lived, I don't know, 200 years ago or maybe longer. I don't know. So everything would be communal, all the works. Men would be fishing, and the women would prepare the food and deal with the kids, pretty much, And every evening they would have. I remember that I installed the antenna right in the middle of the village because there's no space, and very careful so that when you put the guy wires, you wouldn't hit huts and things somewhere.
Right.
And they said, well, no, here's fine. They said, I said, well, listen, but I'm sorry, it's not good because it's in the kids' play, like
over the grip.
They're gonna hit this environment. They don't want to damage, but they're gonna hit the wires, and then the antenna is gonna come down. Then I have to go in the middle of the night, and this and that is no good. And they look at me and says, no. Nobody's going to touch this. And nobody, there were kids around it, and they played all day with balls and things, and at no point has anybody ever touched the wire.
That's amazing.
It's incredible. Amazing. The guys were there, the youngsters, they're not that many, but there were guys who were like, 12, 16, And in the evening, there would be a get-together. There would be a couple of young girls, and they have their own thing, and the guys are there. And they'll throw around, they'll throw different things at each other. No. And the young, no. And people would go around it or underneath or, because they would be leaving. This was between huts. I was amazed. I thanked them very much, and I said, this was the second time there was somebody operating from that place, and is the rarest iota in Temotu. It's the rarest iota in all Solomon, but in Temotu in particular. And
that's amazing. They're very friendly too. Sounds like
they're extremely friendly. Actually, I knew of them because otherwise I wouldn't have gotten there, but. The person who owns the Pigeon Island, who is married with locals, but is originally a third generation British. The guy he hasn't been in many, many, many years in Duff, like maybe like 20 years. But he knew of the new chief, the new tribal chief, from his driver, whom he's using for tourists to do different things. And this driver was the driver who led the Japanese team to visit Duff, I don't know, maybe like some years back. And so he was the person who arranged for the contact. He told me that he didn't talk to this guy. He had a sat phone for emergency situations, right? But he didn't talk to him. He just said that, don't worry, this is how much they normally charge. This is how much is this stuff. I'll give you the driver. This is how much I charge for the driver. So, and we got there. Well,
do you have a sat phone, or I know you got a radio, obviously, but do you carry something like a sat phone, or?
Well, it depends. It depends.
A satellite phone.
It depends.
Obviously, there's no cell service there.
Right.
So,
right.
Do you have like a satellite phone or anything like that?
Well, there's a system. It's not quite a satellite phone. The system is called InReach. I don't know if you reach.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like IN reach.
Yeah.
The InReach system is if you want, it's a subset of. So it's that the InReach system is primarily for adventurers, or people, mountaineers, people who travel places. But they cannot afford to have something quite as expensive as a sat phone per se.
Right.
So it provides certain functions of a sat phone, but they're predefined and you have to buy whatever you want. So for example, you have a button that you can press, and that's the SOS. Will transmit your coordinates and everything else.
Right.
And you can receive any text message. They're virtually unlimited. Well, they say that you can use so many per minute, up to 150 words, if I remember correctly, right? Up 160 words per text. But you can receive, well, it's not infinite. It's practically, from a practical point of view, it's infinite number of such messages, right? And you can also send such messages. But if you don't have a separate, if you don't have the adapter into a computer, it's very difficult to type because you don't have a keyboard.
I saw something, an ad for, this is new, or it's new to us anyway, but I saw an ad for a device that says worldwide, anywhere in the world, you can send a text through a satellite with, by attaching it to your cell phone. So it communicates to the cell phone via Bluetooth, and it works as a satellite phone, but it's only good for text, is what it said. And it's
might be
like
something
$2 per minute or something like that.
This one, the most advantageous, well, when well, the way it is, you rent this stuff. Like you can get it for a month, and it comes with whatever you want to pay for. Like maybe you want to put 2 hours on it or 1 hour, it's not more inexpensive. It's very relatively inexpensive if you buy the time ahead. Otherwise, it's, as you said, there's a certain charge. And I don't think that I ever use it more because, the way this works, you're not charged for anything that you receive. But for example, I don't have to tell people anything. Just they have to say, I copy you 14041, call me, or listen 3.5 up or something, right? Or something like that. So they can send these text messages as many as they want. I don't have to pay for them. I don't pay for them.
Right.
But if I want to send something to someone, then this gets into the time that I'm supposed to pay.
That you bought.
It's not that, I don't remember exactly, but I think that I had, if I remember correctly, I had, exactly as you said, I had a kind of like a Bluetooth, and I used to type on my computer. And I actually was able to send direct emails through it, like email messages, but they had to be limited in you know, what you type. But only to, I don't remember exactly, I didn't have it for a while, but only to predefined addressee. So the best is to, let's say you have, well, in my case, I had my wife that I wanted to correspond with, and I had the pilot. Okay? So the pilot, I could send the pilot lots of messages because I predefined him and I pre-introduced, and I didn't want to be bothered of sending messages to tens of guys. Some people do, I prefer not to. So I prefer to tell the pilot, well, you could tell anyone to send me, but I don't want to respond. So the only thing they can do, because I don't really want to stay and work text messages, you know.
That's understandable. You want to work DX,
right?
You don't want to sit there and
there would be guys, but there would be guys who would say, for example, we copied you at 4:30 UTC, but you can't hear us. Well, then I can't hear you because I was, you know.
Yeah.
Or they were saying, some other times they were saying, well, the best propagation on 30 meters is, I don't know, I'm making it up, 4:30 to 5:30 UTC, beyond 30 meters. Well, I was last night on 30 meters at that time for Europe, and I couldn't copy a thing. So, you know, it's, what can we do, right? But I don't want to drag into this. If the pilot would send me a message like that, I would reply something like, I was last night, couldn't copy, or just work view stations, or something very short, you know. Yes, I think that if you announce the operation and if you want some funding, some participation, the guys kind of want to have, I don't want to say control, but they want to have, they want to see that they have a chance, they have a, there's a real possibility for them to be able to influence a little bit what happens, right? So if you just go a day, well, you know, 24 hours.
But you do have some communication, though. You do have some out.
Communication, right? But in some other cases, like in my early days, when I was up in the Arctic, I didn't have that because I don't think that this, I didn't know, I don't even know if it was available, this InReach system, which is the one that I use.
Yeah.
But when you go into the Arctic, you can't really use, it has to be, because, you know, the stationary, I mean, the satellites are a different angle, and you really need a true satellite phone that would work for the Arctic area. And every time I was somewhere, the guides would have one, you know, and
Like somebody would.
Okay.
Somebody would, in other words.
Somebody would, yeah. So I knew this ahead of time that they will have one. So I wasn't that interested in doubling this by having another one. So I said, okay, well, they have one, that's good enough, you know. But see, up north, the elders used to, because I've been 3 times in winter, well, close to spring, but it was still winter up there. The elders used to know the weather patterns by checking the type, the crystallization of the snow. because depending on how, well, I don't know how to do that, but depending on, see, if they point you out to it, you will see that snow has a different way of crystallization, granulation, smoothness, and they have many, many words for it. I don't know, I heard like 30 words to express these things. And they actually can distinguish between the wind coming from, I'm making it up right now, north, east, west, whatever, and
Right.
type of pattern, and you know, by how the snow forms deposits.
It's truly amazing.
Now the elders knew. I was told this. This is how the elders knew to find their way back home from the hunting grounds or the fishing grounds or whatever. Nowadays, the younger guys, their kids, or the kids could be actually quite adults, but they're, you know, they're not the elders. They all use this kind of GPS devices.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's understandable.
They don't know. Very rarely you're going to find one guy who might know some of this stuff, but they don't know. So if they go hunting, fishing, whatever, and they get lost, and somehow this device is malfunction or don't function, they lost.
Like Don says, take all the radios. Yeah, you're dead.
I'm very curious. For the elders, it's an issue that, you know, so yeah, but we always had some form of communication, and it was mainly for safety, not for, you know, I mean, just in case something happens, there's a way to warn others. Hey.
Well, we've kept you long enough. I got one more question, and I'll let you go, and I'm gonna get out of here as well. But when you go to that, like Pigeon Island,
yeah.
When you were there, do you take your own tent, or did you stay with them? Do you take your own food, or you know, do you eat with the folks there, or how's that work?
I prefer to tailor to all the the logistics are tailored to minimize the effort, but also keep the budget in check, because you could stay to a luxurious place that's minimal headache, but that'll cost you, you know. So what happens on Pigeon, you can go on Pigeon with anything you want, but the flight from Honiara to Lata allows you 7 kilograms of free, with a ticket of free transportation. For anything else, if I remember correctly, you pay the equivalent $14 per kilo. May not sound much, but I had an amplifier, and I had 2 rigs because I couldn't afford to go with one.
Well, that battery was heavy.
Hey?
That battery was heavy.
No. The battery and the generator was from the guy on Pigeon.
Oh, okay.
Right. So there's no issue there's no point in taking a tent, because he would have I might have saved a little bit, but you know, the rain is such that in the tropics is such that there was no. I had to be nice with him. He was supposed to give me the driver to take me to the end of the world where nobody would go otherwise.
Yeah,
you know? So
I see.
I had to let him make money on something that is reasonable for him to make money, so that you know, wouldn't cost me an arm and a leg. So there's no way. You know, he has a few. I would like to say rooms. they're all kind of arranged. Everything is kind of, his resort is arranged kind of like a cottage, you know, but cottages, you know. And because he had no visitors at the time, this was out of season. For them, it was out of season. Off season. Oh, yeah, out of season. He gave me a very, very good deal. So the issue wasn't that. The issue was that when I was in Solomon, I also wanted to 2 other IOTAs. So this was the 3rd one. And I spent altogether probably, well, at least a couple of weeks, plus sometimes to get organized. So, you know, a lot of flights, a lot of boating. So, you know, it's not that one thing costs a fortune, but every single thing, you know, actually, as a matter of fact, what cost me proportionally most of all this deal was the flight from Brisbane to Honiara. That was actually more than the flight from Toronto to Brisbane.
Oh no! How about that?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, so but I was very lucky because there's one German ham and activator. Bernard is his name, Delta Lima 2 Golf Alpha, Delta Lima 2 Golf Alpha Delta, I think. And Bernard is the person who, in a different era, approximately 30 years ago, he activated for the first time many of the islands in that area, Vanuatu, Solomon, you know, things around this area. He probably activated 28, and nobody will ever do that again, 28 new IOTA groups. But at that time, there was either no requirement, because there was no minimum requirement to operate until 2001, when the first rule of minimum 250 QSO was set. And then a little bit later, there was a minimum number of contacts that a new one is supposed to have before it's approved, 1,000. So now we all want to make thousands, but Bernard, who's an exceptional guy, he's a phenomenal guy, but that was not on his mind. He would just work only in nets, maybe 100 stations, maybe 100 contacts, maybe less, depends on how many he could just jump on a boat and be there for a couple of days, because the boat has to return, right? And that would be the end of it. And then if he has a chance, he might go back and maybe work, you know. But Bernard doesn't like the pileup, only works SSB, and only worked at the time in nets, in networks. So, you know, it's difficult. But Bernard decided to leave half of his life, 6 months, every year, for the last, I don't know exactly, I would say at least 20 years, maybe 30 years, in Solomon. So he obviously knows everything that you can possibly imagine someone like that would know. So you can arrange anything with him, you know. He would know. Like, for example, I asked him, and I paid for his travels to go to a particular island where I knew that this used to be a coconut plantation, and they would have oil and also things, until the locals revolted. They wanted some kind of a, I don't know, better pays, whatever, and the guys decided to shut everything off. And then nobody's employed anymore. So the island is in turmoil for the last 50, well, probably 17, 18 years now. And there's a tense situation because a lot of guys from neighboring islands just came and established themselves on the lands of the plantation. Just like, you know, what would you call these?
We call them squatters.
Squatters.
and nobody, you know, they got some of these old offices or whatever of the plantation where they squatter. And you know, it rains inside. They have all sorts of vessels. Nobody wants to put a dime to repair because it's not theirs.
Yeah.
You know, it's a deplorable state. But by the same token, the issue is that you know, how safe is to operate from there, because there might be a confrontation. I mean, you know, there's a tense situation between the local government and the neighboring guys, let's say the immigrants, because they are from the same country, but they speak a different language because they're from a different island, or you know, so whatever. So there's a tense situation between them. And then there's also a tense situation between, I guess, the former owners and all the squatters. So this is the reason why nobody goes there. This is why, you know. So do I want to get into this any kind of? So I spoke with Bernard, and I said, well, would you be willing to go? Listen, I pay for everything, but you know, I got to know, because I prefer to pay, you know, I know maybe $600 to sort this out, then eventually get there, pay double that, and get back empty-handed.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. And he says, no problem, I'm going. I talked to the guys, you know, he told me what boat he can take and when. He had all the time in the world to do it whenever, you know, there wasn't any rush. So he got there, spoke with someone, found a place to lodge, I guess, you know. And he also talked to the local police detective, you know, to make sure that, you know, we don't have any problems, antennas, stuff, you know. So, so he helped me tremendously with the logistics of planning everything and knowing what am I doing, where am I going, and yeah, I mean that's a phenomenal help. He operated from all the groups in Solomon and I think Vanuatu as well. But so Bernard, I think, to characterize him properly, I'm kind of a pioneer. He's not really the skilled operator to, you know, he wouldn't take the pilots, you know, he would just tell them, if you call again, I'll shut up and I'll shut off, and he will just close the equipment and, you know. So, yeah, but he's very knowledgeable and
well, he's got the experience too.
He has the experience, and he has he knows exactly when I'm asking something. He knows exactly why I'm asking and what exactly am I asking. He doesn't have to relate it through his time and space, which is, you know, so much different than ours. So, you know, that's a phenomenal thing. But the locals on Duff were absolutely incredibly warm, and you know, they really helped, and well,
sounds like it.
the chief in particular, but I can't remember.
Well, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go to bed here pretty soon. I got to go to work tomorrow. It's about 11.
Thank you very much.
11. Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed your program, talking with you and listening to all your
look forward
different escapades.
on the air. When conditions would allow us to maybe dream a little bit of places for now.
Oh yeah, well, you gave me some insight.
for now,
enjoyed that.
we just finger crossing,
Really do appreciate it. It was really
Thanks again,
interesting.
guys. Thank you very much, Don. And we'll talk to you a little bit later. And have a good night, guys.
Okay.
And I'm going to sign up.
Don, I mailed your USB thing today.
Okay. Thank you.
So you can get it in a couple of days. All right. I'm out of here. Cesar, thank you very much.
Thank you too. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Harold.
Good night.
Good night, Harold.
Night.